So, nobody trusts Unity anymore. I happen to use the dang thing for the game I'm developing, Momentum. I used to really love the engine, but when Unity us 2 months ago, I had to consider alternatives. And the plan I decided on is a little weird. I've used Unity since I was 15. I've become so comfortable and familiar with it that inside the Unity editor I made a
music making program and a video editor.
I'm using it right now. I swear I'm really don't have a problem. I just like making tools. Especially for 2D, I felt like I'd practically
become married to Unity. But I couldn't just stick around after what Unity did. At least not without looking at the alternatives.
So what were my alternatives? To start, I checked out Godot and made a list of my concerns. Started on a script called Godotification and made some changes to Godot's source code. I added weighted curves, vector arrays, added more UV channels. I had to do neat them. I realized there was a lot more I needed to add as well.
Overall, I found that Godot wasn't a good fit for specifically my project.
With Unity, my game runs around 60 to 80 FPS on my 1050 Ti at 1080p, but I've got a 144Hz monitor, so I really want it to run faster. For the convenience of sticking with Unity, I could live with 60 FPS, but switching the game to Godot would have been a big move, after which my game would probably run slower.
People were talking about custom tools for converting assets from Unity to Godot. I was thinking, the code for my game is pretty much 99% done, so if I make a one-to-one asset conversion system, it doesn't really matter if I rework my game's code now and switch the engine now, or do that all when my game is almost done, given of course that the conversion is one-to-one, or very close to it.
That way, I could keep using all the editor tools that I've spent a long time making. So, I decided to continue using the Unity editor to develop my game, but instead of having Unity build the executable like normal, I'd write some extra code to export everything to a custom engine that has its own version of all the runtime features that I use in Unity. An engine that has full parity with Unity. In regards to specifically my game and nothing else. Many years ago I wanted to switch from Unity to Monogame, maybe partially because my idol game dev company Supergiant Games used it for Transistor and Bastion. And although I soon returned to Unity, Monogame has always had a place in my heart. If Unity is a busy, loud, and possibly highly polluted city, then Monogame is off the grid. It's not as convenient, but a peaceful life where you make what you need by hand. For Hades, Supergiant Games moved their engine from Monogame to the Forge. That's how I learned about the Forge. The Forge has the same cozy vibe as Monogame to me, but it's also more exciting because it's C++. Also, it's being used by Supergiant Games. Maybe I'm just imitating them at this point. What I really love about Monogame and the Forge is that if a problem comes up, it's something I can fix myself, not spend ages on a bug report, and wait weeks
or months
for, in some cases, the reply to be is actually intentionally and then having to put on my Karen, and then having to fight
to try
to convince them to reconsider. Okay, sometimes I was just doing things wrong. Maybe it was a lot of the time. But can you believe that they insisted on keeping in these easily? And if the problem isn't quite a bug, then the chance of being changed is close to zero. That's what made me really focus on making my own code these past 7 years.
Which, given the current situation, is actually pretty cool, because I have the legal right to use this code outside of Unity.
Unity eventually walked back their plan, but not before all trust was lost, and not before I'd become really excited about my own devious plan, and the performance improvements I expect from it.
I have a mission for you. Like, subscribe, and comment your social security.
So the engine, which I call the Parity engine, is being built on the Forge, which is C++. I feel like C++ is kind of similar to C#, right? Right? 2 months ago I didn't even know that Visual Studio can help find bugs in C++.
I thought C++ programmers just got used to the fires of purgatory.
When I was revamping Liquid Fun, I would spam my code with gibberish logs and see which one was written last, to find where my code was crashing.
Or comb through every line again and again, until I start blaming my computer, but knowing that, whenever I've done so before, it's ended up being a stupid mistake on my part.
Turns out you can just press F5 and Visual Studio does most of that for you. And you might even meet helpful little guys like this when you're doing something wrong. So far I feel like C++ is pretty okay, just more work, less guardrails, and more power. The Parity engine does do some things differently than Unity does, though. It uses reference counting instead of C#'s garbage collector to track alive objects. It uses nodes, not transform game object pairs. This is an idea I got from Godot. This simplifies the reference counting. Scenes are instead just nodes. This is an idea I got from Godot. Instead of Unity's custom null check for when an object is destroyed, there is instance ID and object handle which uses an ID integer and version integer. This is an idea I got from
Unity's entity component system.
There's no reflection, just abusing templates and macros. Text won't use signed distance fields anymore, which is kind of fine because I'm not caring about texture space usage
anymore.
Instead of assigning a shader to a material, each shader has its own class that inherits from material. No burst compiled jobs, but there's also easy access to simd, so that's a plus. No compression, basically everything including sprites or raw bytes, but it's probably fine. Everything is made with momentum in mind, so the engine assumes a lot and has many limitations that Unity does not. I've got a ton of C# code in Unity. Okay, most of these I don't use in momentum, but there's still a lot of code to convert to C++. That's where my code converter comes in, the successor to the Godot-ification script, and the worst code I've ever written. It takes my C# scripts and handles most of the boring syntax changes. So what does the Parity engine have so far? Deserialization, instantiation, animation, as well as serialization, prefab variant property propagation, and undo redo, but those are not needed for now. This is done without reflection, by the power of abusing macros and templates. I just have to declare fields twice, like so, and this mess takes care of the rest. There's a basic rendering system, meshes, mesh renderers, sprite renderers, materials, shaders, frustum culling without spatial partitioning lol, and sorting by the z-axis, dynamic batching, a graphics.blit equivalent, quad tree like dynamic sprite atlasing, which is wasteful compared to dynamic batching ability, and Unity would need a massive sprite atlas containing almost every sprite in the game, which would probably be worse. That's not nearly enough. So what's the rest of the plan? I'll tell you. Step 1. Forge's shading language doesn't support structured buffers, so I need to choose workarounds for that. Step 2. I'll need to re-implement CastRP, and make sure it runs well. Make sure that I didn't just waste over 2 months when Unity alone holds the secret sauce to making my game render fast. Step 3. Recreate the volume component, and post-processing. Step 4. I gotta figure out what to do about coroutines, because C++ doesn't have IEnumerables. Doesn't have either of those. Step 5. I'll try to find some audio library that has a powerful reverb filter. When making my music maker, I learned a lot about how audio filters work, but the filter I skipped entirely was the reverb filter. Just look at all these settings that Unity's reverb has. All of them must be important. Step 6. I'll recreate audio sources. Step 7. I'll re-implement what I need from
Unity's particle system.
Step 8. I'll need to make a basic job system. Step 9. I'll make some GUI code for the settings menu. The rest of the game does not use barely any GUI. Step 10. Add a lot of small things like skinned mesh deformation. Step 11. I need to finish up the exporting script for converting Unity engine assets to Parity engine assets. Step 12. Run the code converter on the rest of my code, and then do the changes that I did not want to write into the code converter. Step 13. And finally continue development on momentum inside the Unity editor. Home sweet trampled on by execs. Home.
And after this game I'll use Unreal Engine to develop a 3D game, or maybe make an editor interface for the Parity engine to make another 2D game.
There are some extra benefits of my plan.
I made a text renderer in 2017. Yippee. Now I won't feel like that was a waste of time.
It should load faster.
AFAIK.
Unity uses reflection to load fields and instantiate prefabs, and to do so, Unity always writes the field names, even when serializing to binary. But knowing that the fields are not going to be reordered, my engine just gobbles up the binary really efficiently with the power of macros and templates. And abusing them. Don't forget. It should also render faster. In Unity, there are so few restrictions for sending data to the GPU, but now I've seen how the GPU expects to receive data. There must be a lot of things Unity does behind the scenes which no longer needs to be done. There's more control over the performance in general, and hopefully fewer of those pesky frame time spike that a profiler doesn't explain
sufficiently.
I have more freedom for multi-threading, because Unity constantly checks if I'm accessing anything outside of the main thread. Now I can fill the command queues for my jiggle system on a separate thread. Unity has a lot of safety checks, even in release builds. It's terrified of developers messing around with the internals, so it makes copies of data before sending it to you. I can just not do that with my engine. That should save some performance. Also, the log file won't be spammed with these annoying lines. Ultimately, not very important, but I don't like them.
There are some problems, of course.
The engines need to maintain proper parity. If a crash happens, I'll have to blame myself. There's no editor.
But for now I'll be freeloading Unities. If that's the correct word, please don't sue me.
And maybe the performance improvements in certain areas won't compensate for Unity's fine-tuned optimizations. And I will die inside. Do I feel like what I've got so far is 2 months worth? Do I feel like the last 5 years?
Beep boop. If you press the like button and subscribe button, then the Robo Army will forgive you.
I swear I'm crazy. I just like tools.